recording, we're going to hit from the beginning, and that's working. Then I'm going to touch this. This is Mr. Burns just talking to myself. I'm going to click this button here, and now we're in the view that I want you to see. So we're going to go over the bank war. The bank war was an important issue in the presidential election of 1832. One of our candidates was Henry Clay. He was from the National Republican Party, and he was a big supporter of the Bank of the United States. The other candidate was the president, Andrew Jackson. He was more suspicious of banks. He favored state banks over the federal bank. And we are now going to embark and learn a little bit more about this important historical event. So let me try to click on that. Nope, that didn't do anything. I want to go over here and circle two things in my notes. We got the spoils system, and we got this word down here, corrupt. Okay? The spoils system was not invented by Andrew Jackson, but it was made more popular by him, and presidents that followed Andrew Jackson were all supporters of the spoils system. Under the spoils system, if my party won office and I took power, what I would do was fire most of the workers that I was able to fire, and I would replace them with supporters of me. Now, where the corruption came in was that often, the best person for the job did not get the job. Instead, it went to someone who had done me a political favor, or somebody that could do me a political favor, or somebody that owed me money. So the spoils system was corrupt, and it was very much a part of our history for many years following Andrew Jackson in the 1830s. All right, so Henry Clay. Oh, that's not working the way I want it to. Here we go. There. Henry Clay. So this is a picture of Henry Clay, and I know you can't see it too well because my screen is overlapping with that. But 1832 is an election year. The two parties are the Democrats and the National Republicans. Henry Clay was not a big fan of Andrew Jackson, and he was eager to defeat Andrew Jackson. Clay, in his lifetime, would run for president 4 times, and he would lose each of the 4 times. But nonetheless, he was a very influential candidate. So here's what Clay platformed on. Every candidate has a set of beliefs or issues that they think will get them elected president. Henry Clay's was called the American System. And under this American system, he first of all wanted a strong Bank of the United States. He wanted the federal government and state government to pay for internal improvements. And in the 1800s, internal improvements were roads, canals, bridges, and a little bit later on, there are also going to be things like railroads. Clay wanted to keep the price of Western lands that the government could sell very high, because this was a source of income for the government. And the last thing that he was a firm believer in was a protective tariff. So, countries buy things from other countries, and a tariff is a tax on goods coming into the country. So a protective tariff would support, American manufacturers and American industry. So let's go to the next slide. So on this slide, you see kind of the picture of Andrew Jackson that was promoted in a lot of the newspapers that said that he was taking too much power. He was often called King Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson came from humble roots, so he was more a supporter of small farmers, people living in small towns. Probably a slight majority of the people fit into these two categories. He had a distrust of banks. As a young person, or as an adult, he had lost money when banks failed, and bank failures were very common in the 1800s. And one thing that especially made him popular with the American people, and this is probably a sad commentary on the times, was that he was in favor of Indian removal. And pushing tribes west of the Mississippi would open up lands for people to buy so that they could start their own small farms. So, one of the interesting things about banks in the 1800s was that they could issue their own money. So the federal government did not issue money, banks issued money. Jackson favored gold over paper money. Oftentimes banks would issue too much paper money and the loans would go bad and they would go bankrupt. And if you had your money in one of these banks, you just lost it all. All right, so a third person we need to introduce, and there's a picture of him right there, is Nicholas Biddle. Nicholas Biddle was the president of the Bank of the United States. He was a very powerful man. The Bank of the United States was the biggest bank in the country, and it was the biggest bank because it handled the government's money. So two things that the Bank of the United States could do was, since it had more money, it could make more loans. But Biddle was also a shrewd businessman. He made lots of loans to senators and members of the House of Representatives, and then these people in turn would kind of protect the power of the Bank of the United States. A good thing that the Bank of the United States did was it regulated state banks. So it could buy up the paper money issued by a state bank and go to a state bank and try to exchange that paper money for gold or silver. And if the state bank did not have the gold or silver, it could put that bank out of business. In the very least, it kept many state banks from trying to issue too much paper money. So in that way, the Bank of the United States was a good thing. What we're looking at next here is Henry Clay really believed he had a win-win situation here. Even though the Bank of the United States was not due to be rechartered, which is a fancy way of saying given permission to do business for another set period of years until 1836, Henry Clay persuaded Nicholas Biddle to go to the Senate and the House of Representatives and ask for the Bank of the United States to be rechartered early. Clay really believed that Jackson would veto this bill. And then he thought that because the bank was so popular, when that happened, it would cause Jackson's defeat. If Jackson signed the bill, again, he thought it was win-win, that if he signs this bill, it's going to automatically make him president. Well, actually what happens is Henry Clay badly miscalculated here. In sending this bill and having Jackson veto it, it just rallied the common people to Jackson, and he was easily reelected president. Now, the really terrible thing that happens then during Jackson's second term, from 1832 to when he leaves office in 1837, is he decided that I'm going to destroy this Bank of the United States. Nicholas Biddle was against me. He tried to take the presidency away from me. This Bank of the United States was against me. I'm going to take away its power. It's got too much power. So what Andrew Jackson did was he began to pull money out of the Bank of the United States. The government has bills, and what Jackson did was use the money in the Bank of the United States to pay these bills, to pay off this debt. And then any new money he sent to state banks. And usually these were state banks that, just like the spoil system, had done something for the president. They were called pet banks, is the name that was given to these special state banks that the president liked. Well, what really happened then in the long run is that the state banks now have nothing to regulate them, and they begin issuing too many loans, and before long we have a financial collapse. Banks fail, people lose, people can't pay back their loans, it's hard to buy new farmland. Industries can't get loans to upgrade their factories, and it just is a nightmare for the United States. It causes a big depression in 1837. So, in a nutshell, that is the bank war. It involves President Andrew Jackson. It involves a political rival, Henry Clay, and Nicholas Biddle, the President of the Bank of the United States.